Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. We're going to be talking about the Sonoma County Airport's sustainability program and the baseline that we've put together for that, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. Next slide. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Nathan Stinnett. I'm a sustainability consultant with RS&H, located in Virginia. And I have with me my colleague, Cassidy Nocenzo. Also working on this project is Karen Buhler, who's in our San Francisco office. I'm not sure if she's going to be on the call or not. She had some conflicts today, but she's been helping us with the project. And Gabrielle McGrath is also assisting. Next slide. So here's our agenda today. We're going to talk about the purpose of this webinar, why we invited you here, and what we're trying to share. A little bit of context from the County of Sonoma. We have some folks from Sonoma County who are going to talk a little bit about what they're doing on climate and resilience and sustainability, and that will help us see how the plan that we're putting together is going to be aligned with that. We'll give you a little overview of the Sustainability Management Plan, or the SMP, that we're developing, how it works, what the different parts of it are, and what we're trying to achieve. And then we'll go through the baseline. So we'll be talking about the airport's sustainability performance in a number of different areas, different focus areas that you see there on the screen. We'll talk more about those. And then finally, at the end, we'll have some next steps. We'll talk about where we're going from here with the project and so forth. Next slide. So just wanted to cover a little bit of this meeting format. You can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function on your screen. We will try to answer questions throughout the presentation. If there are a lot of questions and we can't get to them all, we will answer them and post them on the airport's webpage after the presentation, so that you can see the answers there. Hopefully we'll be able to get through them all, but if we can't, that's our backup plan. We also have some polls built into this presentation, and the way you'll access those is through a QR code. You can actually hold your smartphone up to it, and it will give you a link to go to and respond to the poll. Also, we'll be putting the link to the poll in the chat, so you can just click on that link or paste it into your browser to go to those polls. And the results of the polls will come up on the screen, and then we'll have a little discussion about them. I think at those points in the meeting, we'll also pause to maybe answer a few of the questions that have come in through the Q&A. We also will have a brief, very brief, just 4-question survey after this meeting. We'll provide the link to that at the end, and that will give you a chance to kind of give us comments and feedback and ideas in a sort of open-ended format. And that will remain available for 2 weeks after the webinar. So really, there's sort of 2 purposes to this meeting today. We want to share with you what we're doing and what the airport's been doing on sustainability. We want to look at those goals, sustainability goals that we're setting, ideas for initiatives. We also want to get your ideas and your feedback on those things. So if you can help us out by participating in the polls and the survey and so forth, that would be really great. There's also a translation feature in this webinar. If you need a different language or some other type of accommodation, there's a little box that says CC in it in the lower right of the screen, and you should be able to access those things through there. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about our objectives today, and they are to understand the background of the Sustainability Management Plan, review the baseline and the sustainability progress that STS has made to date, and then share and gain feedback on our preliminary sustainability goals and our proposed initiatives for the airport. I want to be clear that although this is the first time the airport has done a formal sustainability plan, STS has been working on sustainability for many years. They've already accomplished an awful lot, have made a lot of progress towards being a sustainable airport. And so we'll be highlighting some of those projects and achievements today because I don't think everyone knows about them as well as they should. With the sustainability management plan, we're going to be trying to build on that record, help the airport go even farther in line with the state of California's ambitious sustainability and climate goals and Sonoma County's goals, such as their net zero goals that they have set. We're also looking to align this project and this plan with the FAA's sustainability planning program. And of course, the FAA has lots of regulations that apply to airports that in some cases may limit some of the things we're able to do. And we're also aligning closely with the county's sustainability efforts. So what we've done so far is develop a baseline. And by baseline, I mean kind of a snapshot of all the progress that the airport has made to date. So that's both qualitative and just talking about things the airport has done, but it's also quantitative. We've tried to quantify, energy use and water use and all these kinds of things related to the airport's operations. There is a full draft of the sustainability baseline that's available on the airport's website. And if you're really interested, you can go and read all the details there. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every single thing today, so we're going to kind of hit the highlights. But if you want to delve deeper into it, that is available. So we'll be taking a look at the baseline, and then we'll be talking about some of the sustainability goals and the proposed initiatives that we're working on. Next slide. Okay, so now we thought it would be great to start this off by having the county give us a little bit of perspective and put context of what they're doing, and that way you'll be able to see how we're working towards aligning our efforts with what the County of Sonoma is doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Jada Nabigan, and I'll let her tell you about the county's program.
Thank you, Nathan and Cassidy. Hi, everyone. Great to see some familiar faces. My name is Jada, and I'm the Principal Climate Resilience Analyst at the County of Sonoma. And we are very happy to announce that we got our Climate Resilience Comprehensive Action Plan completed and approved by the board in September 2024. So I want to talk a little bit more about essentially how it came to be and how it ties into the work that's currently happening for airport sustainability. Next slide, please. So, as some of you may know, in early 2021, the Board of Supervisors approved the 5-year strategic plan. And as part of that strategic plan, there were 5 pillars. One of them was specifically the climate action and resiliency pillar, which I exist within. So, as you can see, these were the goals that were outlined to essentially invest in climate action and resiliency and create achievable goals for the county to accomplish. So invest in wildfire resilience and preparedness, community resilience, making the county facilities carbon-free, zero waste, and climate resilient, transitioning all of the county's fleet and electrifying it, and then, of course, focusing on adaptation and land conservation work. There is this overarching goal, though, for the pillar to make Sonoma County carbon neutral by 2030. And all the jurisdictions in Sonoma County have adopted this goal as well and are responsible for achieving their own carbon neutrality for operations and also helping businesses and residents achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 as well. Next slide, please. So what we were intended to do was create a path to carbon neutral, zero waste, and climate resilience by 2030. And this was essentially the pie in the sky idea for creating the plan. So we thought it would make the most sense to bucket it into 3 different categories of timelines. So we have our near-term measures, which were focused on the 2024 to 2026 time range, our midterm measures, which were focused on the 2027 to 2030 time range, and then our longer-term measures that were kind of being impacted by decisions being made up until adoption of the plan, which was in September, to 2030, because the landscape around climate changes a lot. So those were our post-2030 initiatives and measures that were put together in the plan. Next slide, please. And as part of this, There were a lot of resources and initiatives that went into building out this plan more comprehensively. So one of the key documents was the Sonoma County Climate Resilient Land Strategy Report, and that was essentially helping to identify different opportunities, projects, initiatives for the county to implement, both community and operations based, to help us become, again, more climate resilient, zero waste, and carbon neutral by 2030. And the other critical document we used was the Carbon Inventory and Sequestration Potential Study. We love long names at the county. This document was essentially supposed to highlight a spatialized representation of different types of carbon sequestration practices you could apply on county-owned lands. So for example, where can you do like cover crop in on county-owned lands, like around its facilities? Where can you apply compost in different parts of county-owned lands? So these are some critical documents that help to create that foundation and have actually helped to inform other reports, such as the crop report that came out in 2023, emphasizing some of this climate resilient work. Next slide, please. And while we do love the carbon sequestration and nature-based solutions, which are more on the adaptation side, we also had built environment solutions as well. So the way the plan is broken down is energy, transportation, and zero waste measures are the built environment. So our buildings, our cars, and our facility maintenance and operations. Whereas nature-based solutions, water, wildfire, and natural working lands focus more so on like what can we do in terms of shaping our actual landscape to become more climate resilient. So there are measures, they all hold different amounts of measures associated with different areas and regions. And one of the ones that's probably most impactful for the airport is the zero waste measures, because we did an audit that essentially highlighted how we could mitigate some of the zero waste, some of the waste that was at different types of county facilities, and an airport was a great opportunity to focus on that type of work. Next slide, please. So with the adoption of the plan, we got a boost of 2.27 million in initial funding, and this was to directly implement the near-term measures. As you can remember, the near-term measures are intended to be implemented from basically now until the end of 2026. And as part of that embedded 2.27 million in initial funding was a dedicated amount of 460,000 in community engagement strategy funds. This was intended to be a community engagement strategy that will be implemented from 2024 to 2026, at the end of 2026, but we're thinking we might have to push it a little bit to 2027. So that bucket of money will be used to basically talk to people about what do you need to be climate resilient and how can the county help you? And then the third, I guess, sub approval related to the plan was a restructuring. So the Climate Action and Resiliency Division is being dismantled, and we're being put in different arenas to still continue working on implementation of the plan. Next slide, please. And just for high-level awareness, to talk a little bit more about the community engagement strategy, the intent is to build it out into its own community climate plan. And there are initial steps we want to take to make sure that this process is equitable, accessible, and fruitful for all parties involved. We understand that engagement fatigue is a real thing. So as part of this fundamental strategy, we want to focus on first building out an advisory committee of community voices, specifically trusted organizations, community leaders, etc., who can help lead some of this community engagement work, because we've heard time and time again that there is a certain level of distrust with local government, and hearing from people on the ground who have their same lived experiences is a greater way to build efficacy for the work related to climate resilience, climate change, climate justice. So that's one group of people who are going to be doing this engagement. And also the county will be doing a ton of collaborative engagement as well. There's different initiatives. Sonoma Water has one coming down the pipeline for their climate equity strategy. And then I think that's the right term. And then Permit Sonoma is also working on updating the general plan, which has an environmental justice segment. So they're doing community engagement, and we're hoping to collaborate with them extensively to do some of our own engagement as well. That is separate but intertwined with community-based orgs or community voice leaders engagement as well. And of course, we want this to be culturally relevant via venues and different types of events and diversifying that scope as well. And essentially, this is intended to identify priorities, needs, barriers, and opportunities to becoming climate resilient and carbon neutral and zero waste by 2030. And again, to see how the county can fit into helping create that opportunity for people to basically check that box. And we are hoping at the end of this engagement that, as I mentioned, will probably be into 2027, to prepare recommendations for the county to support community climate resilience. Outside of that, oh, next slide, please.
I think that's your last slide.
Oh, okay. Just kidding. Moral of the story, the plan was adopted. Happy to answer any questions you may have moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jada. I think that provided a lot of really good background context on what the county is doing. Everyone, again, can feel free to submit any questions into the Q&A feature. I am not seeing any right now, so we'll probably keep going. And then the next time we pause, any questions that come up, we can go back and revisit. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the background of this project. So the sustainability management plan for the airport. So when we're looking at sustainability at airports, we are typically looking through the lens of EON. So EON stands for Economic Vitality, Operational Efficiency, Natural Resource Conservation, and Social Responsibility. So essentially, these 4 pillars can help airports achieve sustainability while also balancing a sustainable approach to managing their resources, managing relationships with the community, and guiding their overall operational and sustainability goals. By focusing on these areas, airports can continue to boost the local economy, improve their own operational performance, reduce environmental impact, and contribute to social well-being. When we're looking at sustainability, there are several factors that can drive an organization's approach to sustainability or reasons behind sustainability. So one of the major drivers is federal and state regulations, especially within California. There's several Senate bills, Senate Bill 32, 100, all the climate adaptation and resiliency bills, which call for preparation of state climate adaptation strategies and other resilience requirements for local governments. These are major drivers for sustainability, especially within the county and California. We also want to align as best we can with the County of Sonoma's existing sustainability program, which Jada just gave some background on, and align with those broader community objectives. Another major driver is community interests and expectations. These community interests can help push the airport to meet the needs and the desires of the local residents and encourages the airport to increase its achievements on sustainability. Risk management is another major driver. Engaging with sustainability and resilience planning can help mitigate potential environmental and operational risks for the future. We also see resource efficiency and financial benefits when doing sustainability planning. through cost savings and operational efficiencies. It's also important to align with industry trends and stay at the forefront of sustainable aviation practices. And finally, by engaging with sustainability, this opens up some doors for the airport to receive increased access to grant funding. So altogether, these drivers collectively shape the sustainability approach at the airport and help to guide the airport in achieving long-term goals. So when looking at a sustainability management plan, or SMP for short, it is composed of several major factors. The biggest factor that everything kind of stems from is that sustainability mission and vision. So these mission and vision statements serve as guideposts for the entire SMP. They set the direction for the plan, and everything else essentially stems from these developed statements. The mission statement typically gives an organization its everyday purpose and emphasizes the core values and activities that it would typically pursue. Then the vision statement is a bit more aspirational and looks towards the future. It typically outlines like an inspiring picture of the organization's long-term goals and the impact it wants to have on the world and the community around it. So after you develop these mission and vision statements, you start to develop focus areas, which we'll talk about in a few slides. But these focus areas are areas within sustainability that the airport wants to focus on. And then, like Nathan was saying earlier, we develop a baseline assessment, which is essentially a snapshot in time of where the airport is now, what achievements they've already made, and where they might look to improve in the future. From that baseline assessment, we begin to develop goals and projects which are designed to accelerate sustainability progress at the airport and take STS to the next level within the sustainability space. And then finally, one of the most important parts of a sustainability management plan is the implementation. So actually figuring out where that funding for projects is going to come from, who's going to be responsible for them, and how exactly those will come into play. So this is just a visual representation of what a typical structure of a sustainability management plan might look like. At the top, again, you see that mission and vision where everything is kind of stemming from. The mission and vision guides the entire plan. Underneath, you'll see several focus areas. And then underneath each focus area, there are a few goals. If you look to the bottom, which is outlined in a dotted line, that kind of zooms in on a focus area. So you'll see there are 3 goals, and each goal has several initiatives underneath, which are going to be those more specific projects that help us in achieving those long-term goals. So in collaboration with the airport, back in the spring, we held a visioning workshop to develop a mission and vision statement for the airport. So the current sustainability mission statement is to serve our community by sustainably operating the Charles M Schulz Airport, emphasizing safety, economic viability, and responsible stewardship of natural resources. And then the vision statement is to provide innovative, sustainable, and resilient aviation services for future generations of Sonoma County residents and visitors. So as you can see, that vision statement is a little more aspirational and forward-looking, whereas the mission emphasizes core values of the airport. As part of this sustainability management planning process, we've developed 5 different focus areas for the plan. So the baseline assessment focuses on these 5 focus areas and tells a story of what the airport has achieved and where they're currently performing in these areas. So the 5 areas are energy and emissions, materials management, environmental stewardship, finance and governance, and social responsibility. And finally, this table is just showing how the airport's sustainability plan aligns with the County of Sonoma strategic plan pillars. And as said earlier, we want to align with the county as best we can. And so on the left here, we have the airport SMP focus areas, and on the top, we have the County of Sonoma strategic plan pillars. So if, for example, we take a look at energy and emissions, we can see that the energy and emissions focus area is in support of climate action and resiliency, healthy and safe communities, and resilient infrastructure. So across the board, we are aligned very well with the county, which should be beneficial going forward and making sure that this plan is implemented as well as possible. With that, I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Well, thank you, Cassidy, for that overview of the SMP. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the focus areas. We're going to go through each focus area and just summarize some of what we learned when we did the baseline, as well as have a look at the goals and initiatives that we're looking at. So I'll start with energy and emissions on the next slide. And energy emissions, it's very important focus area for the airport because energy use is so important to that sort of organization, and because obviously we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and energy use is a major contributor to that. These are some of the subcategories within this focus area. So we'll be looking at things like renewable energy, energy use in facilities, efficient buildings, fleets. So the airport has a fleet of vehicles, and we'll look at the efficiency and the fuel types for those vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. So if you're trying to decarbonize or electrify your vehicles, you're going to need to be able to charge them, and carbon reduction policies that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. So one of the real sustainability successes that I think is very impressive, one of the things that STS has already done, they have a sustainability portfolio, solar panels that produced about 4 gigawatt hours of electricity since it was implemented in 2022. So it's producing about 1.3 million kilowatt hours per year. And this covers a significant portion of the airport's entire electricity usage. So most of the electricity that STS is using is already carbon neutral and locally generated, which is, I think, is really great. The energy produced by this system has saved the equivalent of over 300,000 gallons of gasoline, or equivalent carbon reduction of planting 70,000 trees. So it's already had a significant impact in cleaning up the airport's emissions and providing clean energy, and will continue to do so for many years to come. And on the next slide, we can see the airport's energy use. So the airport is using somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.3 million kilowatt hours per year. Since 2022, the majority of that has been provided by the solar portfolio. So you see that the amount in 2022 of energy that the airport had to purchase from the grid was only about 22% or so of the total energy use from previous years. So it's had a significant impact in terms of cleaning up the airport's power supply. Next slide. Something else the airport is doing to reduce emissions is promoting the Good Traveler program. So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions at an airport, there are 3 scopes or categories of greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 1 is fuels that are burned in equipment and vehicles that the airport directly owns and operates. Scope 2 is usually that green grid electricity, so power that you're purchasing from a utility. And then scope 3 is things that really are not owned or controlled by the airport generally, but the airport may have some influence, but it doesn't own or directly control those things. However, it's still important to try to reduce those scope 3 emissions where we can. So when we think about an airport, we tend to think about the airplanes and the air traffic that's occurring at the airport. And obviously, those things contribute to emissions. But the airport doesn't own the airplanes. They're owned by the airlines. And so those are scope 1 emissions for the airlines, since they own and control those planes. There's scope 3 for the airport. So the airport has sort of limited ability to control those emissions, but one thing they can do is promote this Good Traveler program, which gives travelers the opportunity to offset their carbon emissions when they're flying. And so that's something that they've been promoting. It also has other benefits. The funds that are collected play a role in funding regional projects to reduce carbon emissions. Next slide. So some of the other things the airport has done, fleet electrification. The airport has purchased 2 electric tractors with CARB grants. They have an electric truck now for operations, 2 hybrid electric pickup trucks, and a hybrid Ford Explorer. There's about 25 or 30 vehicles at the airport. A lot of trucks for operations and maintenance, firefighting, some street sweepers, those kind of vehicles. Some of these vehicles are difficult to decarbonize because they're larger vehicles. There are a few diesel vehicles that really there aren't very good or any battery equivalent vehicles available at this time. So what we're doing is looking at how those vehicles that can be electrified, seeing which vehicles have the potential to be electrified, and then for those that maybe don't at this time, we can look at other types of alternative fuels which may reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Along with that, we're also looking at electric vehicle charging stations to make sure the airport's vehicles can be charged, as well as vehicles that the public uses to access the airport. So the airport does have charging stations in place. Most airport lighting has been transitioned to LED, which is much more efficient than older forms of lighting. The exception is runway lighting, which is subject to FAA regulations. And the last time that lighting was replaced, LEDs were not allowed, but they were upgraded to quartz lighting, which is more efficient than what they had before. Something also that's very exciting, the first thing that you see at the top left there is sustainable aviation fuel. So again, aircraft create emissions when they burn fossil fuels, but there's a global effort to develop and make available sustainable aviation fuels that would reduce some or all of those emissions. So STS is leading in that because they've already been offering sustainable aviation fuel at the airport through one of their FBOs. It could be up to 12 to 15% of jet fuels next year. So they're continuing to expand that program and trying to be at the forefront of that movement towards sustainable aviation fuels. Next slide. So that's just some of the things that the airport has already done. I think it's impressive. We also have our goals. So we're looking at the baseline, looking at what's been done, and looking at what remains to be done and what we can do to take STS to the next level. So we're looking at trying to achieve a farther 15% reduction in energy use by 2030 from the 2021 baseline, and that would be through energy conservation measures, help to narrow that gap between what the solar portfolio is producing and the energy needs of the airport. We're also looking to support the county net zero goal by reducing those scope 1 and 2 airport greenhouse gas emissions 90% by 2030 compared to the 2021 baseline. Now, again, that's only 9 years away, so that's pretty ambitious to say that we'll be able to do that. But part of that could be offsetting any remaining emissions. And then for the fleet, looking at replacing half or 50% of the airport's light duty trucks, non-road vehicles and equipment with electric hybrid zero emission or CARB compliant equivalents by 2030, and then continuing to install electric vehicle support equipment or electric vehicle chargers at the airport to support that electrification effort. And then we have some ideas for potential initiatives, areas for improvement. We've kind of generalized them because there are an awful lot of them. So we're looking at things that would increase the energy efficiency of the airport's buildings. Many of the buildings are already very efficient. They were built recently, but there are some remaining older buildings that could benefit from upgrades in some cases. Looking at the potential to invest in additional clean energy or offsets to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We talked about the Good Traveler program that's been available for some years, but we think that the airport can do a better job of promoting it and letting people know about it. We're looking at third-party sustainability verification programs, so things like the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, or ACA, Envision, which is third-party certification for infrastructure construction projects, and then certifications like LEED for any buildings that are constructed to make sure they're as efficient and sustainable as we can make them. And then also looking at creating an electrification plan for the airport fleet vehicles. Next slide. So now we have a poll. If you have a smartphone, you can hold it up and scan that QR code that you see on your screen, and it will take you to a link where you can answer the poll with your phone. We're also going to put the direct link in the chat. So go to the chat if you need to access it that way. And it may take a minute to come up, but we're going to paste it there. I think it's there now. And then as you answer the poll, the results will come up and we'll be able to discuss them. So we'll just take a minute for everyone to have a chance to get in there and access it. If you're having trouble, let us know through the Q&A so we can troubleshoot it.
Yeah, and again, please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A, or comments is fine too, since I know the chat feature isn't working.
So we're starting to see some responses here. And the way they're showing up, the dark blue is someone rated it extremely important. Red or orange is lower importance. So the things that we're seeing show up as the most important are investing in more solar, energy efficiency of buildings, third-party verification, electrification plan, and a bit less importance so far on the Good Traveler program. So thank you for giving us this kind of feedback. It's really helpful. It's definitely something we will take on board. If anyone has any specific comments about, why they think some things are more important than others, or if you have specific ideas about things you think we should be looking at within the area of energy and emissions, we would love for you to put those in the Q&A so that we can just capture that for later, even if it's not a question. If it's just a comment, that's fine too. So we do have a question. I see it says, you say the airport has public charging stations, but the last several times I've tried to use them, especially in front of the terminal, they weren't working. Are they being repaired? And I do not know the answer to that. If someone from the airport knows, they can jump on. I'll just say that it is a problem with electric charging stations, that sometimes they malfunction and they need to be repaired. So I would expect that that will happen if you can check back later, or hopefully the next time you're visiting the airport, they'll be working again.
Hi, Nathan. It's Renee. I can answer that question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Yes, we did have some issues with our charging stations, but those have been repaired, and I just looked at it again. They are all up and running, and we do actually have some of them occupied right now, but those have been up and running for some time now. We did have some issues with them with the connectivity on it, but glad to say that they're all up and running and everything's been working on the loop as well as in Lot B.
That's good to hear. Okay. Cassidy, anything else on the poll or the questions, or shall we move on to the next focus area?
I think we can move on. Let's see if I can get to this. Yeah, I think we can move on. Oh, there we go. So we don't have to necessarily talk through all these now, but it looks like we have some comments here which we can review. And again, feel free to provide any additional information with that follow-up survey that we'll share at the end of the meeting. All right. The next focus area we're going to dive into is materials management. So materials management is largely about waste. So looking at solid waste, meaning anything going to landfill, recycling, composting, and then a little bit more specifically, construction and demolition waste, because we see a large amount of that when there are large construction projects ongoing at the airport. So Jada mentioned this earlier, but the county recently did a waste audit of all county facilities to understand what type of waste was being produced and how much of that waste is divertible. So divertible waste means that waste can be sent to places where it does not end up in a landfill. So that could be recycling, composting, specialized recycling for things like batteries or things that can't go to a traditional recycling facility. So this figure here is showing the airport results from that study. As you can see on the left, about 35% of that waste is residue, around 25% is paper. Then we have plastic and C&D debris around 10% or a little over. And then the rest of that waste is organics, which would go to compost, metal, glass, or textiles, and hazardous waste. And the results of this study found that up to 99% of the waste produced at the airport is actually divertible. So that means the airport has a really great opportunity here to increase its waste diversion and work towards those county goals of getting to zero waste. And currently the airport needs better data to fully understand what its current waste diversion rate is. So in terms of tracking and measuring that waste diversion rate, that's something that the airport wants to focus on moving forward. In terms of the waste management practices at the airport, there's currently triple stream bins located throughout the terminal, exterior to the buildings, and within office buildings. So these triple stream bins encourage passengers to dispose of their waste in the appropriate bin. So essentially, you either put your waste in recycling, trash, or compost. And this presents a significant challenge, as it does for any organization who is attempting to increase their waste diversion rate in terms of contamination. So when you introduce the factor of human error, timeliness, laziness, anything like that, the waste contamination can get to really high rates, which means even if you have a full recycling bin, if there's contamination within that bin, the recycling carrier might not accept that, which would mean it would all be sent to landfill. And a large reason for this issue is because the regulations on what can and cannot be recycled or composted differ based on the location. So each county, state, country, whatever it may be, has regulations that differ from their neighbor. So to demonstrate how difficult it is for everyone to recycle or compost properly, we have a fun little quiz which was developed in part with the Zero Waste Sonoma Department of commonly misrecycled or misplaced waste. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code. It also should be in the chat. And you can go through and attempt to select what you think would be the proper bin to dispose of each item in. And some of them are more surprising than you'd think. And there should be, let me see if I can send it. Doesn't look like it. All right, so the greasy pizza box definitely always gets me because that's something that switches county to county, whether or not it's accepted. The correct answer here is in fact compost. So most of you guys got that right. Next question is a coffee cup. This one I think I've been doing wrong because whenever I go to the airport and get Starbucks or something like that, I do always think I can recycle it, but that is in fact landfill within Sonoma County. Empty water bottle, everyone got correct. That was a pretty typical one that we threw in there. Paper towels, that's correct, going to compost. Most of you guys got that. And then chip or candy wrappers would be going to landfill. And then this last one is a bonus. This one surprised me as well, because this is something that I think I heard growing up. You should remove the cap from your water bottle, but reading through the Zero Waste Sonoma guidance, you actually are supposed to leave that cap on your water bottle when you recycle it. And we can provide the document that this is all from. It was developed again by the Sonoma Zero Waste Department, because I think it's just really helpful in general to have an understanding of what can and cannot go where. But again, this just demonstrates there's a lot of issues with materials management. A lot of it comes down to specific regulations, how people understand and are communicated what can go in which bins. So it's just a tough thing to get perfectly right. So within this focus area, we have 3 proposed goals. The first goal is to track, document, and achieve waste diversion rates in line with the applicable county and state targets by 2030. The second is to develop and implement a communications campaign to motivate travelers to divert recyclable and organic wastes, and also work with airport tenants to increase recycling and compost diversion by 2030. So this goal would again focus on some of that communication of what materials can go where within the county. And then the last goal really focuses on C&D waste. So we would aim to require construction contractors to achieve a 75% construction and demolition waste diversion rate for all major airport construction and renovation projects by 2030. So in order to achieve these goals, we have some generalized initiatives and potential areas for improvement that could put the airport on the path to achieving those goals. One of them is to implement training programs for staff and partners to increase diversion rates. We could engage in a food donation program. So essentially any leftover food from concessionaires or tenants could be provided to a local food bank. There's some regulations surrounding that, but there are some organizations that we could work with to engage in a program like that. We could also develop a recycling implementation plan, which would focus on decreasing contamination, increasing diversion rates, and really communicating to partners, the janitorial staff, and the waste hauler what exactly needs to be done for the materials management focus area. Again, we could require contractors to adhere to a waste diversion policy and also engage with the community to promote proper usage of waste bins. And this could be as simple as just adding visual stickers or documentation to those waste bins showing exactly what can go where. All right, now similar to the last focus area, we're again going to ask everyone to scan this QR code and share your opinion on which focus area or which initiatives or focus areas you think are most important for the airport to focus on. And we should start to see those answers populate here. The link to this poll should be in the chat as well. And then again, any questions you have, please submit through the Q&A function. Okay, so we're starting to see some responses come in. Again, the darker blue that color is, the higher importance that the group feels that initiative should have. So it looks like coming to the forefront is developing a recycling implementation plan, perhaps a little less importance, focusing on communicating proper bin usage. Looks like almost all the initiatives are swinging pretty far to the right, though, and I think that reflects that materials management is a focus area we really want to focus on in the future and really work towards those larger Sonoma County goals of zero waste. All right, with that, I think we can move on to the next focus area unless anyone has any questions particularly related to materials management. If not, feel free to submit any other questions at the end. We can always revisit them later.
Well, thank you, Cassidy. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions, but again, if you just have comments or something you want to tell us, feel free to put it in that Q&A chat. So the next focus area we'll talk about is environmental stewardship. And on the next slide, you can see that this encompasses water use, stormwater, wildfire mitigation. Obviously, wildfire is an issue in Sonoma County. Air quality, indoor environmental quality, land management, also things like pollution prevention. So these are just some of the things we're looking at within this focus area. Next slide. So here you can see the water use for the airport over the last several years. And water use, may vary a bit from year to year. It's fairly level. 2021 was a little higher than most of the other years. And then we saw a pretty significant decrease in 2022. And that's related to the airport implementing water saving measures and water restriction requirements that came about in response to the 2021-2022 drought in Sonoma County. So obviously there was a lot of water conservation going on at that time, but there are things that the airport has done that will allow it to continue to save water going forward. So the airport has significantly reduced the amount of irrigated areas that it has on the airport property. Also, most of the water fixtures at the airport have already been updated to be high efficiency, low flow type fixtures. So there's not a whole lot to do, a whole lot left to do in terms of water conservation, just in terms of upgrading faucets and things like that. Most of that work has already been done. Next slide. Something else the airport is working on, it's very important, is wildfire resilience. One of the major efforts there has to do with eucalyptus trees. So there are many eucalyptus trees on the airport's property. The airport has already removed about 400 of them. And the reason is that eucalyptus is highly flammable and it's kind of a hazard when it comes to wildfire conditions. There are about 1,800 eucalyptus trees remaining. The airport is working on getting grant funding in place to remove the rest of them. So that will help reduce fire risk on the airport property. Next slide. And then we want to talk about PFAS elimination. So PFAS is a group of chemicals that have been used in many, many products over recent decades for their stain and grease resistant qualities. Those qualities also make them very effective for firefighting foams. And so like most organizations that have firefighting capability, the airport has in the past used firefighting foams or AFFF as it's called, which contains PFAS. Unfortunately, it turns out that PFAS chemicals have the potential for significant negative environmental and health consequences. So as more evidence comes to light about that, the EPA has begun restricting their use. It's a bit of a tricky situation because also, you have to have firefighting capability and firefighting foams, and those have to meet certain specifications, and the FAA requires certain foams be used. But recently, PFAS-free versions of the AFFF have become available and been approved by the FAA for airport use. So STS is in the process of switching its AFFF to PFAS-free versions. This will help protect the environment and ensure that the airport is not contributing to PFAS pollution going forward. Next. So that's just a kind of a quick overview of a few of the highlights. Obviously, there's a lot more in this focus area, and you can go and look at the sustainability baseline if you want more details. But these are some of our proposed goals that we have within this focus area. So evaluating and implementing water saving features into new and existing facilities and operations, looking at more methods to increase defensible space and harden airport buildings against wildfire in line with the county's wildfire resilience project. Increase biodiversity on the airport property. So the airport actually manages a lot of land that can have ecological benefits if it's managed correctly. So we're looking at promoting native and pollinator-friendly species, removing invasive species, and integrating best practices into land management activities. And then also looking for any opportunities to improve the carbon sequestration on the airport property. So Jada was talking earlier about the carbon sequestration plan that the county is doing, and that has shown there's significant potential to actually lock up carbon in the ground and prevent it from getting into the atmosphere through land management. So the airport's looking at ways that it can do that, and hopefully we'll be able to implement some practices that improve the carbon sequestration on the airport property. Next slide. So some of the potential initiatives that we're looking at, continuing to follow regulations for low impact development and green infrastructure. So those are sort of ways to save water, conserve water through natural features and engineered features that include, plants and those kind of natural components. Also pursuing wildfire mitigation opportunities. We talked about that. Managing airport land to sequester carbon, integrating sustainable landscaping. We talked about something like a native plant garden or a pollinator garden on the airport property might be a possibility. Performing a water audit. So water audit is where someone comes in and checks all the water use in the airport. They'd look at utility bills, and they'd also look at the fixtures, and they'd check for leaks. And that would help to increase water efficiency, and probably some recommendations would come out of that would help the airport to use less water going forward. Next slide. So now we have another poll. It's pretty much the same format as the others. You can scan the QR code or click the link in the chat and just tell us which of these different areas you think is most important for us to focus our attentions as we look to develop initiatives for the SMP. And again, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we can also respond to those. I see some results coming in. now. Just a couple so far. So it looks pretty positive for low impact development, water audit. Yeah, I think those are great ideas. Wildfire mitigation, obviously important to do all that we can there. The carbon sequestration did not score quite as high as the others, and I understand that's maybe it's going to be a little tricky maybe to balance the carbon sequestration with some of the requirements that the airport has for like wildlife mitigation and things like that. And then the sustainable landscaping is also not scoring quite as high. I'm curious why that is. So if anyone wants to comment on these on their scoring decisions, I'd be interested to see that. But thank you for the input here.
All right, so with that, we'll move into the last couple focus areas. This first one is finance and governance. So within finance and governance, we'll really be looking at revenue sources, funding opportunities, sustainable purchasing, capital improvement planning, and resilience. And resilience fits within this focus area largely due to the planning aspect of it. So looking to the future, ensuring that projects that are on the horizon are going to be built to adapt to and withstand the changes associated with climate change. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the economic impact of the airport to the region. So in a recent economic impact analysis, the economic impact of airport businesses, visitor spending, and the resulting jobs, payroll, and tax revenues was calculated, and it was found that the airport supports over 1,700 jobs annually, generates over 90 million in payroll, generates around 34 million in tax revenue, and overall creates 231 million in additional economic output for the county. So just looking at these factors, we can see that the airport's existence is a major economic driver for the county and helps encourage the economic vitality of local organizations and businesses by encouraging tourism, travel, things like that. This chart is showing a summary of federal funding received by the airport for the years 2019 through 2023. This is a summary of FAA funding, so Federal Aviation Administration funding. We're seeing a large amount of funding in 2020, mainly due to the terminal expansion that was done at the airport, as well as some funding for COVID relief, which was received by many airports during that time. Looking to the future, we're hoping that the sustainability planning can help gain additional funding from the FAA to support implementation of projects and encourage sustainable and resilient infrastructure at the airport. Another major success of the airport within this focus area is its green business policies. So in 2022, the airport signed an environmental policy statement, which stated that they strive to incorporate sustainability into their core operations through internal and external efforts, specifically adopting the practices of reduce, reuse, recycle, avoiding toxic chemicals, conserving resources and moving away from fossil fuels whenever possible, and promoting environmental education, outreach, and awareness to staff. So this is a great document and policy for the airport to have. Looking forward, I think one of the goals or focuses we would have is the implementation of this policy and seeing if it can be further expanded to include partners or if there can be any more specific implementation measures associated with it. Within this focus area, we have 4 proposed goals. The first goal is to secure grant funding and develop a climate resilience assessment and adaptation plan for the airport by 2030. So that would essentially be looking at the impact of climate change on the airport's assets and operations. The next goal would be to update the current sustainable procurement policy and improve the implementation to achieve 50% of qualifying purchases meeting sustainable criteria by 2030. The next goal is to develop sustainability design criteria for new builds or to pursue sustainability in new construction through third-party certifications by 2030. And then finally, to support and prepare for the aviation sector's transition to clean fuels and electrification by 2030. In order to achieve those goals, there's several generalized initiatives and areas where the airport can focus on. The first one's relatively simple related to the goal. That would just be focusing on acquiring funding for a climate vulnerability and adaptation plan. Another potential initiative could be incorporating sustainability requirements into selection criteria. So when you're looking at construction contractors or tenants and concessionaires, you could implement requirements for the business or organization to have some sort of sustainability requirement. We could also look to improving the implementation of existing airport policies regarding sustainability. Another initiative could be integrating sustainable design standards into projects. So that would be kind of creating a design standards manual, which could guide new construction and saying, when you're building this, consider that the temperature could be 10 degrees higher in the future. Make sure that's considered during your design process and through the construction phase. And then finally, completing planning studies for the integration of sustainable aviation fuel, unleaded avgas, and eVTOL into operations. So the airport is currently already undergoing or exploring a feasibility study for sustainable aviation fuel. And that's where some of those predictions for SAF that were mentioned back in the energy and emissions focus area came from. So now we have another poll similar to the previous focus areas, just hoping to get everyone's feedback on these potential initiatives. And it does look like there is a question regarding the airport's plans for growth. Someone had heard there's a plan to build a Hilton hotel at the airport. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm not sure if that's something that anyone at the airport could answer.
There is a proposed hotel adjacent to airport property that's not planned or being built by the airport. And it's a Hyatt place, and they just broke ground on that a month and a half ago.
All right, looks like we're starting to get some responses flooding in. Looks like they're all pretty positive. Again, I think within this focus area, these are some of the sustainability initiatives that are, I think, a bit more logical and make sense financially because it involves finance and governance. A little less emphasis on that first one, acquire federal funding for climate vulnerability adaptation plan, but we are still seeing some 4s and 5s on that one as well. All right, with that, I think we'll move into our last focus area, which is social responsibility. And please feel free to keep sending stuff in the Q&A. I'm just going to keep moving on for the sake of time, and then we can revisit any questions towards the end. So within the social responsibility focus area, this focus area can be pretty broad. It involves internal and external factors. So some of those internal factors are employee attraction and retention, workforce development, and then some of the external factors are community engagement, public transportation, and partnerships. And then all encompassing the diversity, equity, and inclusion focus area or sub-focus area can be applied internally and externally to the airport. So some successes that the airport has had in terms of community engagement, the airport does a good job of engaging in community activities. They're primary sponsor of the Sonoma County Airport Napa to Sonoma half marathon and have been for several years. They also support organizations and such as Girls in Aviation and the Young Eagles Rally. And they provide resources and a space for career development at the airport by providing a job fair that's open to the community and any employers. Also, the airport has done a very good job of supporting local art and business. Throughout the terminal, you'll see several local art installations, as well as the airport being home to several vendors offering local products. So the Crush Sonoma Tasting Room and Tap and Pour offer local beers and wines. There are several small business operators for grab and go options, such as the Charcuterie Machine from Petaluma, the San Fran Chronicle, the Cousteau Bakery, which is a 100-year-old local bakery. So through its operations, the airport does its best to support local businesses and artists as best as possible. The airport also has a Good Neighbor program, which is can be seen on this screenshot of its webpage. Most recently, the airport has been undergoing an approach feasibility study to understand the current airspace and procedures for landings and takeoffs. This study, although it's a few years out from completion, will be looking to consider decreases in greenhouse gas emissions as well as noise reduction based on the approach planning and the different alternatives will be evaluated for not only noise reduction and greenhouse gas emissions as well. And part of this approach study involves robust community engagement. So the airport's had several webinars working with the community to gain feedback and get their input as best as possible to make the process as smooth as it can be. Finally, the airport has Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Goals, or DBE goals. The proposed goal for 2025 to 2027 is 5.4%. And this goal represents the percentage of work that's anticipated to be performed by these DBE firms on federally funded projects. And DBEs are typically owned by minority communities, women, or small businesses, and it opens doors for them to engage in projects with the airport and support them in contracting opportunities. Now, within this focus area, we have 3 proposed goals. The first goal is to provide sustainability, DEI, and workforce development training for airport staff and require it for new hires and current employees by 2030. So that is more focused on the internal social responsibility at the airport, and it can be supported by existing county training in these areas. The second goal is to develop outreach campaigns for airport tenants and stakeholders aligned with county campaigns on energy and efficiency, electrification, renewable energy, and energy storage, and to encourage tenants and stakeholders to adopt green business certification programs by 2030. So that's mainly focused on partnerships. And then finally, this community-facing goal is to increase community awareness of STS's sustainability program and accomplishments by developing and implementing a targeted sustainability communications plan by 2030. So in order to achieve these goals, the airport can look at increasing airport accessibility through public transit, increasing internal workforce development, so looking at trainings, benefits, things like that. Provide and track sustainability and DEI training for employees, engaging tenants and concessionaires, establishing a communication plan to effectively and equitably engage the community, and then providing displays and informational services to passengers regarding sustainability just throughout the terminal. So with that, that finishes off our last focus area. Oops, looks like this poll might not be working. Oh no, it is. Okay, we have one last poll for this focus area. We will send that link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code there. And this focus area, the poll does include a few other questions just regarding how the airport has communicated with people in the group in the past and how they prefer to receive their communication. And it looks like we do have a question in the chat. I don't know, does someone from the airport want to address the question? It's regarding the approach feasibility project or the workshop.
All of the slides and information are on our STS Good Neighbors site regarding proposed pass. We have not done an environmental analysis, but one of the outcomes is a reduction in noise. That is one of the goals. And with the continuous descent options that we're seeking to implement, aircraft will be higher and at lower power settings, which should have an impact on noise reduction.
Great. It's probably taking just a little bit longer for these responses to trickle in just because there's a few additional questions. If anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to send in the chat. We have about a little over 5 minutes left in the meeting. So the next section we'll look at is the next steps, but please feel free to share any comments or questions in the Q&A function before we end. And then we will also provide a feedback form at the end. And just looking at these poll results, it's looking like some of them are tracking a little bit further to the left. So that's good feedback for us to have. And we'll also look through the responses to the other questions in regards to preferred forms of communication. So with that, I will pass it back to Nathan.
Okay, thank you, Cassidy. We're almost to the end. Let's go into the next slide. So this slide will kind of show our next steps in finishing the Sustainability Management Plan project. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I hope we've been able to share some of the progress that STS has already made on sustainability and some of the goals that we're looking at and some of our ideas for initiatives that we can do to take STS to the next level. We'll be taking on board all the feedback that we get from you during this meeting and hopefully after the meeting. Again, in a second, I'll talk about our follow-up survey and give you the link to that. The next step for us will be to take all that feedback on board, look at, do we have new ideas for initiatives we want to evaluate? Do we need to tweak some of ours, maybe prioritize or deprioritize some based on what you told us? And we'll be developing those initiatives in more detail. So what that will look like, we'll develop a scorecard for each one that includes project descriptions, roles and responsibilities, like who will actually be responsible for this project. Where appropriate, we'll do cost-benefit analysis so that we can make sure the airport will be getting the greatest returns in terms of sustainability for the dollars that it spends to do the projects. After that, we'll be developing an implementation plan. So we'll be looking at the details for all of the projects that we're proposing, such as scheduling them, funding for those projects, what kind of metrics we would need to track them, and so forth. And then we'll be finalizing the sustainability management plan by compiling all this into a report and presenting that final plan probably early in the next year. So we'll let you know. I think we'll have another presentation towards the end of the project. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. So we do have this brief survey. It's just 4 questions. They're open-ended questions that, you know, you can tell us whatever you want to tell us within that format. We'd love to have format or feedback on this presentation and what you got out of it, what you liked and about it, and maybe what you didn't like as much about it. We'd also like to have your ideas. If you have ideas for sustainability initiatives at the airport, if you think some of the goals are not ambitious enough or too ambitious, those are the kind of questions we would really like to hear from you on. So please scan the QR code, or if we could, Cassidy, put a link in the chat for that, that would also be great. That will be live for about 2 weeks. We'll be receiving responses. So you can even do it later if you don't have time to do it right now. Just hang on to that link for us. And again, thank you so much for your attendance today, and look forward to updating you on the final plan once we get that together. And also thanks to Jada and everyone at Sonoma County for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks, everybody.